A young mother planned to visit her parents for Christmas, but just before the holiday, she stopped communicating. Her parents began searching for their daughter, uncovering strange and frightening clues. Soon, a surprising twist in the case stunned detectives, as none of them had encountered anything so astounding before. Thanks to this turn of events, they eventually managed to unravel the mystery and reveal the truth. Melissa Wolfenbarger was born on September 9, 1977 in the small town of Locust Grove, Georgia. She was the youngest child in her family. Her older sister, who was 7 years old when Melissa was born, helped their mother care for her from the very beginning, and the sisters became very close. In high school, Melissa met a boy named Christopher, and soon after graduating, they got married. The couple moved to a suburb of Atlanta, settling in a quiet residential area. Christopher found work at a glass manufacturing plant, and Melissa became pregnant shortly after the move, giving birth to a daughter and later a son. By 1998, when Melissa was 21, she spent most of her time at home looking after the children. Despite her young age, she was happy to have a large family. Melissa also tried to visit her parents and sister, but due to the distance and various responsibilities, they managed to see each other quite rarely. They planned to visit her parents for Christmas with the whole family. And a month before that, on Thanksgiving, Melissa asked her mom to find a special gift for her. Melissa wanted an old photograph with her grandfather. Her mom went through all the family albums, found a suitable photo, and began waiting for her daughter and grandchildren. But when Christmas came, Melissa never showed up. Her parents found it strange, but initially assumed that she simply couldn't find the time for the trip. After all, she had 2 small children who required constant care and attention. More recently, she had also taken a job at a cafe, as Christopher's salary alone was not enough for them. Her parents couldn't call and ask why she didn't come. Melissa's house didn't have a phone, and mobile phones weren't widespread back then. Melissa usually called them, for instance, from her in-laws' house, but since her last call, she hadn't reached out. Eventually, her parents decided to wait, but when Melissa didn't call on her mom's birthday, they began to suspect something might have happened to her. They decided to go to Atlanta, but there, they encountered an unexpected turn of events. The house where Melissa lived with her husband was completely empty. After talking to the neighbors, they learned that the family had moved out immediately after Christmas, but no one knew where they had gone. This added to the parents' worries. They doubted that their daughter could have moved without telling them. Eventually, they contacted her husband's parents and, through them, reached Christopher. Here, they made another surprising discovery. Christopher stated that Melissa had left him back in December, and he hadn't seen her since. According to him, she decided to move to California and start over. This story seemed very strange to them. First, Melissa's parents refused to believe that she could abandon her children, who were 1 and 2 years old. Second, she should have contacted them or visited, but that hadn't happened. However, Christopher insisted his story was true, and Melissa's parents couldn't get any additional information. They returned home and started thinking about how to find their daughter. Over the next few months, they tried to track her movements, contacting all acquaintances and relatives, but Melissa seemed to have vanished. In the spring of 1999, Melissa's mother saw a news report about police in Atlanta finding a human head bleached in a bag in a wooded area, and later 4 more bags with other remains. She immediately noted that the location was near Christopher's former workplace and thought the remains might belong to her daughter. However, the police later reported that the head belonged to a missing man. Since then, her parents hadn't found any trace of their daughter, and in early 2000, they sought police assistance. However, this didn't yield any results. Investigators spoke with Christopher and concluded that Melissa had indeed decided to leave her family and start anew, which is why she wasn't in touch. They chose not to search for her, but Melissa's parents still refused to believe this version. On the contrary, they became more convinced each month that something bad might have happened to Melissa and suspected Christopher. After the birth of the children, their marriage had encountered serious problems. Christopher had repeatedly raised his hand against her, causing Melissa to leave him several times, taking the children to her parents. But each time, Christopher apologized and persuaded her to return home. This raised more questions about Christopher's sincerity. If he had tried to win her back all those times before, why had he done nothing this time? He didn't call her parents, didn't contact the police, and didn't even try to convince Melissa not to leave him. Another strange point was that, according to Christopher, his wife hadn't taken any belongings, jewelry, or documents with her. All of this seemed odd, but without police help, Melissa's parents couldn't do anything. For the next few years, Melissa didn't get in touch. But in 2003, everything changed in a very unexpected way. In 1977, police investigated the murder of a woman, a case that remained unsolved for 26 years before being reopened. Upon reviewing the evidence, detectives conducted DNA analysis and identified the murderer as Carl Patton, Melissa's father. This revelation was just the beginning. Once Carl was apprehended, he proposed a deal. He agreed to confess to 4 murders if his wife, who had assisted in these crimes, was granted full immunity. In addition to this agreement, Melissa's mother also agreed to testify against her husband and was granted immunity. According to their confession, in December 1977, a woman named Mary, an acquaintance of Carl's, offered him $15,000 to kill her husband due to his infidelity. Furthermore, Mary had taken out insurance on her husband and wanted to claim a substantial payout. Carl accepted the offer and included a friend in the plan. Together, they executed the murder. Unfortunately, the man's mistress was present at the time, so they decided to kill her as well. The perpetrators disposed of her body in a river and left the man's body in a car on train tracks, intending to stage the scene as an accident. A month later, Carl informed his wife that his accomplice had likely confided in his friend about the crime, and now he wanted to eliminate them. Inviting them to his home, Carl killed them, and he and his wife disposed of the bodies by throwing them into a river. His wife also assisted him in cleaning the crime scene and van. Carl later confessed to a 5th murder that occurred 5 years before the others. Mary had offered him money to kill her first husband, and Carl accepted. Consequently, he was charged with 5 murders, and police immediately suspected him to be involved in Melissa's disappearance. However, Carl insisted that he would never harm his daughter and had no involvement in her disappearance. Upon investigation, detectives concluded that Carl was likely telling the truth. Initially suspected of only 1 murder, Carl willingly confessed to 4 more. Carl expressed remorse for his actions, claiming that his regret drove him to confess everything. Additionally, he sought to use the situation to his advantage. He requested a meeting with the lead detective who had linked him to the murder, asking him for a favor. Carl told the detective about his daughter's disappearance, saying, "You caught me, so you can find my daughter." The detective found the case intriguing as it was remarkable even for him. A man guilty of 5 murders was requesting an investigation into another case, and the detective agreed. Reviewing the scant details of Melissa's disappearance, the detective focused on a particular clue: bags found with razors near Christopher's workplace 4 years ago. At the time, police concluded that the remains belonged to a man. But the detective discovered that this theory was based on assumptions rather than forensic evidence. Given the advanced decomposition of the remains, he decided to verify the facts and requested a DNA analysis using samples from Melissa's father for comparison. The results confirmed his intuition. The remains belonged not to a man, but to Melissa. Thus, police confirmed that she had been dead for several years, prompting a reclassification of the case as a homicide. According to the autopsy, the victim's body had been dismembered with a saber saw, while her torso was never recovered. Despite repeated searches of the wooded area, the torso remained undiscovered. However, investigators obtained a promising lead. They began scrutinizing Christopher more closely and spoke with management at the factory where he worked before Melissa's disappearance. It turned out that Christopher had been dismissed around the same time, as he was suspected of stealing a saber saw of identical type. Melissa's mother also disclosed that Christopher had repeatedly assaulted her. Additionally, he had a criminal record. Another curious detail was that shortly after Melissa's death, he changed his name without any apparent reason. All of this pointed to Christopher as the prime suspect in her murder, but there was no evidence against him. Police made several attempts to speak with him, but Christopher maintained his original story, often changing certain details. During one conversation, he claimed that Melissa had a lover and ran off with him, Later, he stated that she intended to sell fake documents, so it wasn't surprising that she hadn't made contact. Police uncovered another intriguing fact. After relocating, Christopher left his children in the care of their grandparents and hardly participated in their upbringing. He rarely visited, and the children didn't even realize he was their father. Yet none of this brought detectives closer to making an arrest, as they needed concrete evidence. They eventually obtained a warrant to search the house where Melissa lived at the time of her death. Considering the killer used a saber saw, detectives believed the murder took place in that house, possibly leaving traces of blood or other clues. Experts meticulously examined every inch of the premises, taking samples from the floor and other surfaces, but their analysis yielded no results. At the time, analytical tools were far less advanced than today, leaving them no choice but to store the gathered materials in evidence, hoping they might someday yield useful information. Since then, detectives have made several attempts to question Christopher and uncover new evidence, but they have been unsuccessful. After many years, the case had stalled once more. Meanwhile, Melissa's father was tried and sentenced to 5 life imprisonments plus 20 years in prison. It's worth noting that Mary, who paid him for 2 murders, passed away in the late 1980s, so she never faced justice. Since then, Melissa's mother and her older daughter have been trying to influence the investigation on their own. They have sought media attention and regularly contacted detectives, but their efforts have been in vain. This continued until 2017, when Melissa's mother refused to give up her pursuit of justice for her daughter. That year, she attended an event where true crime enthusiasts gathered to discuss unsolved cases and seek new leads. One of the participants was a criminologist named Cheryl McCollum, and Melissa's mother approached her for help. She shared her daughter's story and added something that greatly surprised Cheryl. She stated, "My husband committed 5 murders, and I helped him." Cheryl became intrigued by the case and began a detailed investigation after the event. She communicated with Melissa's relatives and even maintained contact with her father, who was incarcerated. What struck her was that a man who had committed 5 murders was most concerned about his daughter's unresolved murder. Over several years, Cheryl gathered all the available information on the case and concluded that the most obvious suspect was Melissa's husband, Christopher. Although there was no definitive evidence against him, a substantial amount of circumstantial evidence left few alternatives. Christopher had repeatedly assaulted his wife and showed no effort to find her or notify anyone after her disappearance, carrying on as if nothing had happened. The most incriminating fact was that shortly before Melissa's death, his factory accused him of stealing a saw identical to the one used to dismember the victim's body. Melissa's relatives, including her children, all suspected Christopher's guilt. They had grown up and were also trying to uncover the truth. Additionally, Cheryl sought advice from well-known true crime community figures, including journalist Nancy Grace and several law enforcement officials. After reviewing the materials, they all agreed Christopher was the most likely suspect. Despite this, they lacked any irrefutable evidence against him, unable to advance the case. Nancy Grace advised Cheryl to launch a podcast to bring the case more exposure. Publicity often plays a crucial role in unsolved cases. It can attract new witnesses who may unknowingly possess significant information, potentially altering the case's trajectory. Ultimately, Cheryl decided to start a podcast, releasing the first episode on Melissa's case in 2023. Since then, she has recorded numerous episodes featuring the victim's mother and other relatives. Cheryl presented all the information she had gathered over the years, yet no progress was made. This continued until April 2024, when a much-needed breakthrough occurred. After an episode, a witness contacted Cheryl, revealing they stumbled upon the podcast and might have valuable information. This person described witnessing a heated argument between Melissa and Christopher shortly before her disappearance. The details of this account remain undisclosed, as it happened just a few months ago, and detectives chose not to reveal key details to protect the investigation. Apparently, during the altercation, Christopher may have threatened Melissa, and Cheryl promptly informed the police. This marked a turning point, prompting investigators to reopen the case. Over the next 3 months, they reviewed case materials, interviewed all involved, and examined evidence using modern technology. Experts analyzed the bags containing remains and various samples from Christopher and Melissa's home, where the murder likely took place. In August 2024, investigators held a press conference to announce Christopher's arrest 25 years after Melissa's death. Like the witness statements, the police did not disclose what evidence they found during the new investigation. Some sources suggest that a reanalysis with cutting-edge tools uncovered DNA traces and other compelling evidence confirming Christopher's involvement in the murder. Detectives have not shared all the details yet. The less information revealed before the trial, the less chance defense attorneys have to use it to their advantage or challenge the evidence. Currently, Christopher is in jail awaiting trial without even a preliminary hearing to plead guilty or innocent. Melissa's relatives are confident of an upcoming conviction, as are the detectives, who seem to have found strong evidence that will be hard to dispute. Thus, the case nears its conclusion, taking nearly 26 years. Melissa's story spread nationwide due to its astonishing details. Initially, police confirmed her death only because her father, arrested for 5 murders, asked investigators for help. Then the podcast played a vital role in attracting a witness whose testimony led to reopening the investigation and ultimately Christopher's arrest. Melissa's children are also convinced of their father's guilt and are hopeful that justice will be served soon. While they await a guilty verdict, they are eager to uncover the full truth and understand Christopher's motives. However, this will only be possible if he confesses. Let's keep an eye on how this case unfolds. In the meantime, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this story in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you for watching.